you all so very much. I must admit that I do have tears in my eyes because, after all, I am one of you, and this is an award that goes very much to who I think of myself as being into my core. I could not be more humbled, more honored, more thrilled, more proud, and more thankful. Thank you all so very much, and what an extraordinary introduction. Thank you. Well, I must say that one of the quite extraordinary aspects for me of this award is in whose honor it was created. That short video of Jane Eveans is so awe-inspiring about a person, a woman of such extraordinary skills and talents and breadth of experience and interest. So I want you to know, in all honesty, that I think Jane Eveans is much more a reflection of who you are than who I am. First of all, I have to tell you that I'm not going to catalog all the ways I fall short of her many accomplishments, but suffice it to say, I am not a pilot, not a boater, not an inventor, and after 40 years of working on women's rights issues, I am still very much an aspirer to the outer circles of the things that she accomplished during her career, her awesome career. But when I think about who you are, I think, first of all, what a reflection it is of all of you that you had such a leader for so many years. That she reflected you and you reflected her, and it was such a good marriage. That she played such a historic role in the pursuit of world power, peace and justice across the globe and domestically here. Again, a reflection of your interests and capabilities. That she was a beacon of inspiration and leadership and courage, and just hearing about some of those projects that you've acknowledged that the sisterhoods have been engaged in all over this country and internationally. What a beacon of leadership and inspiration and courage you all are in your work every day. And of course, when I think about the fact that it will be almost 100 years that you've been in existence, it makes my own organization and my own efforts, and the National Women's Law Center is now beginning a celebration of 40 years, to feel like a new kid on the block, which I have to say is not all bad. So it is pretty inspiring and very humbling to be here today. Well, I want to say that one more thing on a personal note. First of all, I am a member of a sisterhood in my own Reformed congregation, Temple Sinai in Washington, D.C. And that is where my two daughters were bat mitzvahed. One of my daughters' husbands was bar mitzvahed. And the sisterhood has always, in my own experience, reflected women who together can make such a big difference. And of course, I am one of 3 sisters. I do have 2 daughters, and they're pretty awesome, I have to say. And I do believe in my experience and how lucky I was to stumble into this career, as you heard, and I'm the first to admit that I was very lucky that some doors closed and as a result others opened for me. That the support of women and the desire of women for justice for themselves, not only for themselves, but because it would then enable them to be able to care for their families, their communities, and be players on the world stage. That has been the abiding purpose of my career and that of my quite wonderful colleagues at the National Women's Law Center, as I said now, for beginning our 40th year. I was going to say almost 40 years, but now we are into our 40th year. So let me take just one brief minute to tell you a bit about the National Women's Law Center, and then I want to turn to some of the extraordinary challenges that we face. Well, the center, as you heard, was founded in 1972. I came to the center from this tax firm. Arthur Goldberg had stepped down from, of course, being justice on the Supreme Court, being at the UN. I have no doubt he and Jane Eveans crossed paths and shared mutual agendas and causes over many, many, many years. He'd run for governor in New York, had practiced law for New York, and then started to work with Mortimer Kaplan, and the actual commissioner of the Internal Revenue Service in the Kennedy administration, and he had been the Secretary of Labor. He was the first chair of the board, helped get started one of the first public interest law firms, the Center for Law and Social Policy, and I came to start a women's rights project of the center in 1972 if there was enough work to keep one lawyer busy full-time. And as you heard, there weren't any other lawyers working full-time in Washington at that point. So it tells you something about what people with the best of intentions and the most extraordinary values thought about women's legal rights. What were they? Where would you fight? Well, the reason that the center started and was open to the idea of having a women's rights project, which became the National Women's Law Center in 1981, was because of a revolt of the women law students working there at the time and the women administrative staff. And they had 4 demands. Number 1, hire some women lawyers, and there weren't any at the time. Number 2, start working on women's rights as one of the project areas. Number 3, pay the administrative support staff what they deserve. And as women's jobs, they were undervalued and therefore underpaid. And number 4, no more serving coffee. That was their 4 demands. Well, it was the salary that was the toughest nut to crack. Surprise, surprise. But there was this openness, and Arthur Goldberg told me about it and encouraged me to consider that. Well, now, from trying to answer the question, is there enough work to keep one lawyer busy full-time, the National Women's Law Center, based in Washington, has a staff of about 60 people who are working way more than full-time and pretty overwhelmed by the challenges that we face, especially these days. So I am going to be very straight out and upfront with you and tell you that I want to talk about some of the issues that are at the front of our agenda. They very much resonate, I know, with you, and in hearing about and reading about Jane Eveans, they so reflect what she stood for in many ways. And because we are in such troubled times, I am going to tell you now that I'm going to ask for all of you to redouble the extraordinary efforts you already make, or re-triple them. And that's what I'm counting on, and I know is very much in your tradition. Well, let me start with childcare. Some of you may have seen a New York Times lead article in yesterday's paper about the fact that with these tough economic times, with women desperately needed to keep employment, the amount of funds available for childcare are shrinking. As a result, there's real desperation on the part of women and their families about what are they going to do? What are they going to do? The National Women's Law Center issued a report, and I'm proud to say that report was cited a number of times in that story. And one of my wonderful colleagues, Helen Blank, who's devoted her career to childcare and has been at the National Women's Law Center for many years, and I will say is a wonderful Jewish woman, was quoted in that article that when we engaged in welfare reform in this country and cut back on the amount of assistance that we would provide to people out of work who had dependent children and required them to get a job, part of the bargain was to help those women with childcare. And we all know how hard it is to find quality childcare, let alone affordable childcare for almost anybody. If I borrow a statistic in the bottom 99%, let alone those who are struggling in real poverty and need those jobs so sorely, simply, literally, to put food on the table and to keep a roof over their families' heads. Well, in the state of Maryland, just by example where we are right now, there are 8,000 qualified families by income on a waiting list for child care assistance. And those are not the worst statistics. My home state of Pennsylvania, more than 10,000 children who qualify for assisted child care not receiving that assistance, and that number has doubled over the last year. So this is truly, when you think of it, a horrible crisis with respect to what is going to happen largely to women, let's face it, who need that child care, either as single moms or whose income is utterly essential to keep a family afloat. And it's largely women who are the ones responsible for child care. And it's devastating for this generation of children. When we look at the employment statistics, or I should say the unemployment statistics, and I'm not telling anybody in this room something you don't know. We have way too much unemployment, even since the recovery began. And there has only been a very gradual increase in jobs since the end of the recession. But this is something you may or may not know. For women, the recession has not ended. Women have continued to lose jobs since the recession ended. So the jobs that have been added back have been jobs that men have, by and large, filled. And the jobs that women have filled traditionally are the ones that are being cut back the most. So we are actually seeing more women losing jobs. And of course, what are those jobs? Teachers, social workers, childcare workers, social service workers. So women who are the ones who are in the most need for those services are losing out because they're cutting back. And women are the providers of those services, and they are losing doubly because they're losing those jobs as well. So this economic crisis and challenge that we are facing is as much of a women's issue as one can imagine, as much of a social justice issue as one can imagine. And I want to just tell you one other quick story about how all of this relates. The National Women's Law Center a couple years ago did a report with the Mexican-American Legal Defense Fund about the dropout rates, shockingly high dropout rates for young Latinas all around the country. And when we looked at what some of the reasons were, one major reason was that these girls are expected, more than their brothers, to come home after school to take care of siblings, or if there is no child care that the mom has and she has a job that she must keep, to be the one to miss school and take care of family members in need of care. So the dislocation between school for these young girls growing up that leads towards a high school dropout, and then you know how dismal their employment prospects will be into the future, and the lack of our safety net for their families couldn't be more clear. I know you heard earlier in your extraordinary program from Cecile Richards, and who has been an amazing head of Planned Parenthood. And while I didn't get a chance, of course, to hear her remarks, I can imagine she spent a fair amount of time with you talking about the unbelievable assaults on reproductive rights and health care in this country right now. So I'm not going to go through the same litany that I might have otherwise, but I will say that these attacks, there are 83 laws restricting reproductive health care, which includes access to abortion, to be sure, but also incredible attacks on contraception as well, that has been in the news recently, I know. Well, 83 of these laws, contraception, 99% of women who have ever been sexually active in their life in this country use contraception. 98% of Catholic women. The assault on contraception is a direct assault on women's health and women's autonomy. There is no two ways about it. We are fighting that battle every day, and it is an unrelenting tidal wave of assaults that need to be confronted in that area, as is true with all of these safety net programs. And in Congress and in many states, we see, just as we have with contraception being the epitome of what wasn't controversial for many, many decades in this country, when we were facing tough economic times, the poverty programs, the programs designed to keep people afloat who are in the most drastic need, were always saved. They were the ones that were cordoned off for two reasons. First of all, what could be more humane, more just? And secondly, what could make more economic sense than to put money into the hands of people who were going to spend it and keep the economy moving? We are now fighting regardless of what economists say, regardless of what historical fact shows, we are fighting every day the idea that we cannot raise even infinitesimally tax rates for over $1 million for people to allow for continued payroll tax cuts for the middle class, to keep their income able to be sustained and spent, and to continue unemployment insurance so that people literally do not starve to death in this country. Well, I don't understand. I can't imagine. I wish we had Jane Evans whispering in all of our ears. How do we talk about social justice and pure economics and American self-interest to get some rationality on our economic policy, on our civil rights and women's rights policies in this country? And I want to say one other thing internationally, just as an example of, there is something that I know many of you are familiar with and have supported and fought for over many years, but perhaps some of you are not, the Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, CEDAW, an international treaty enforced by the UN, championed by Eleanor Roosevelt, and I am certain to my core, Jane Evans, and I know you all support it, that there are only 6 countries in this world that have not ratified. One is the United States. We are in the company of Sudan, Iran, 3 island nations whose names I could never pronounce or remember in the South Pacific. This is shocking, a Chandra, as they would say. And we tried over the last couple years to get the Senate to ratify this treaty. It takes 67 votes to ratify it. When we are in the Middle East, when we are seeing what's happening to women in these countries, when we are talking about leaving Afghanistan, let's hope, and what's been happening to women in Afghanistan and other countries who are fighting for democracy and independence, and how important it is economically and for democracy to empower women, how does the United States keep itself out of the UN processes to allow these women to use CEDAW to fight for their rights and demand their rights? I have no answer for that, but we were not able to get 67 votes. And who did we hear from in opposition? We heard these crazy arguments that it was going to mean the end of homeschooling in this country. We heard that, when I innocently, homeschooling, what? I can't even repeat the connection that yielded thousands of calls and letters to the Senate from dedicated homeschoolers who were told that ratification of this treaty would mean the end of their right to educate their kids at home. And the lies continue and continue. Well, we've got an enormous amount, as I said, of work cut out for us. The Healthcare Reform Act has so much of importance to women. Not only preventive health care being able to be provided for free and covering kids up to the age that they're up 26 if they don't have insurance themselves, and providing mammographies for women, and not allowing insurance companies to charge women more than men for the same health insurance, excluding maternity coverage, which is the way the private insurance market is to this day. Dramatic changes for women. Well, as I know you know, the Supreme Court is going to hear the constitutionality of this case, this term. And the arguments that are going to be made in that case to knock down the health care reform law are the same arguments that were used during the New Deal to knock down the basic New Deal statutes that have now become, we thought, bedrock principles in this country. As someone said at a meeting that I attended yesterday, there are those intent on repealing the 20th century. I think that's true. Well, we are, among the many other filibusters, seeing filibusters of judges all over the country. The judges right below the level of the Supreme Court are being bottled up. The Obama nominees are being bottled up, and so we have historic vacancies in these lower courts. We have openings for judges who would not necessarily view some of these basic principles in a hostile way, being filibustered even though they have strong majority support in the Senate and not being confirmed. And what we have been told by many in the Senate is, well, people are just not that aware of judges, not that concerned about what goes on in the courts, and so this is also below the radar screen that if there are right-wing people who want to keep off every Obama nominee to the courts, they can get away with filibustering them, and there'll never be a public outcry. So we just have to talk more loudly, have an agenda that is broader than one might have ever thought would be necessary. We have to get even more engaged in what's going on in our community. What are the policies? What are the priorities? How are those budgets being allocated? Where is the income coming from? How do you balance fairly with cuts versus income, revenue streams? Locally, at the state level, at the federal level. We've done some public opinion research, and you know, there are a lot of elections turn on turnout. And there are many women who don't vote, a shocking number of women who don't vote. And when you try to get behind why they don't, this you'll love, they say one of the reasons that they don't vote, aside from the fact that they're so exhausted every day with everything they have to cope with, is that they don't have time to learn what people really stand for, who's better. They don't feel educated enough. Well, I hate to tell you, I don't know how many men say, well, the reason they don't vote is because they don't feel educated enough. You guys are educated enough, and you are in a position to educate others. You are in a position for the people that you serve, for the communities that you interact with, for these fabulous programs when you are meeting people, to make sure that they are comfortable voting, that they know the facts, that they know what's at stake, that they understand the connection between what goes on, whether at the presidential level or at the local school board level, with their own lives, with their own kids, with their own ability to get access to health care. That these issues that get decided in elections make all the difference in their lives and the lives of their children. And you are such fabulous spokespeople, and I know that through your organization, you have access to all the information you need. If you want nitty-gritty details of any sort, nwlc.org, our website has more of those minutiae. And for the nitpickers who were so terrific in going through all of your constitutional changes, we're just in there pitching with you. We send alerts if you want to sign up for alerts about what's going on. We are dying to work with people in sisterhoods all over this country who you represent. You are where we need people to be, and you are so able to speak up and speak out and go to candidate forums and ask questions and call into radio stations and write letters to the editor and get involved even more than I know you already are, because the stakes are so high. So I'm going to end with, again, such heartfelt thanks to you all for an award that I will never forget. My mother is 96. She will be 97 next week, and my whole family will be there for her birthday. This award, everyone in Philadelphia, which is where she lives, knows all about it. I promise you, she has been trumpeting this far and wide. And every relative has been so proud that I have received an acknowledgement that I know that I am really a stand-in for all of you and so many more who aren't in this room, not only for what we've all done and all aspired to and our values that come from our tradition that we're so proud of, but for our dedication to keep going. And I want to end with one story, which I don't know whether you were told or not told, and I didn't hear it directly, but who cares? I choose to believe it's true, and I think it is true. President Obama has a Hanukkah party along with Christmas parties every year. And for those who are invited to the Christmas parties or the Hanukkah party, they have a briefing session that you can go to. Well, the Hanukkah party was the night, or the briefing session, I guess, was the very same day, and then the Hanukkah party was the night that the Secretary of HHS, Kathleen Sebelius, announced that she was not going to follow the FDA recommendation to allow Plan B in the emergency contraception to be over the counter, regardless of age limitation. And while there's been some public discussion about 10 and 11-year-olds who shouldn't have access to Plan B on the shelves, and of course they have access to other kinds of medications and drugs and aspirins and other things that could cause a lot more damage than one pill potentially could, that also costs $50. So how an 10 or 11-year-old would be able to buy it all by herself is another story. But as long as there is any age restriction, it's kept behind the counter. So women have to ask a pharmacist for it. They cannot pick it up off of the shelf. And that is a great barrier, needless to say, for women of any age, let alone teens, who don't have access to get a prescription, who are 15, 16, 17 years old, and who are in no position to become a parent. Well, it was the first time that a FDA commissioner, a secretary of HHS, ever overturned a recommendation of the FDA based on scientific information that had been over the counter all over the world, used safely, was not a danger for the younger ages, and the secretary overturned it. And she's been a fabulous, fabulous secretary, and this came as a total shock. Well, at this briefing, the day of the Hanukkah party, a rabbi stood up, as it was reported to me, and asked about this and expressed great disappointment that in this administration, science wouldn't have been respected. And the person who was leading the briefing said to the array of people in the room, pretty much the size of who you all are, well, I think you're elevating an issue that really is not necessarily of such importance as I understand what he said, and I'm not sure how many people know about it. The entire room raised their hands. The entire room raised their hands. And then people at that Hanukkah party raised it, including with the president. That is a pretty gutsy thing to do. And that, to me, is in the tradition of the Jewish tradition, women and men, who have stood for principle, stood for justice, stood for science, stood for rationality, stood for fairness. And that's why I am so proud, so hopeful, so looking forward to continued ways that we will all cross paths, stay in touch, work together, and do Jane Evans proud. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Reverend. Thank you very much, Marcia. Thank you so much. WRJ is so proud and pleased to give you this award. It says, give her due credit for her achievement. Let her own works praise her at the gates. And I know that Jane Evans would be so thrilled and so proud of us for our choice of this award, and so proud of the work. We are proud of the work you do. And in this current onslaught, as you said, we're proud to have you at the forefront. So thank you very much.
Thank you.